you all to listen to us talk a lot. We're tired of talking. So what we've done is share a draft document with you, and then we're going to talk about that today and walk through it. But before we really get too much into the discussion, I want to do a quick review of the public information meeting to see if everyone had a chance to review what was said at the public information meeting and see if there were anything we needed to talk about or any concerns from that meeting. Did I get a chance to look at it? I think a lot of the comments from that meeting, they seem to reflect the discussions that we've had here. So if you've got any specific ones we could talk about, that's great. If not, we'll just kind of push those on into the other discussions. Steve and I wanted to clarify for a minute some of the critical points of where we are at this stage and clarify what we're doing and what we're not, because I think this is a difficult project to define at times. It gets very fuzzy around the edges. And I know at the public meeting, we had some comments about some misinformation about what we'll be doing, what we'll be providing, what will we not. What we're doing is we're developing a mixed-use district. It's not a mixed-use plan. The town does not own the property, does not control the property, will not make the decisions about how the property is being developed. So in a lot of ways, this is a continuation of what you've done in your comprehensive plan. So our job is it's a fine line between trying to define a vision of what we want done. We, meaning collectively all of us, this is a collective vision that we're trying to do. And we're trying to simplify it and make it as simple and straightforward as we can, but have enough oomph in it to make sure that what comes out of it is what we want. We've heard comments about, well, can you guarantee this will be successful? Very simple answer, no. We can show you a lot of mixed-use developments that simply have not worked. What we're trying to do on this one is to focus on the key issues and not get caught up in a lot of the little details and give it a greater chance of success. We've looked at a lot of projects over the years, so we have a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't. But the way the process is going to work is we, meaning collectively all of us, via the town, will adopt this. Again, it's a process that's been going on for, 8 years, 5 years, a while. It's part of the mixed use is part of your comprehensive plan.
The comprehensive plan was adopted February 2nd, 2011. And that precursor to that was the 250 corridor study and the land use analysis.
So we've talked about this for a while. Once the town adopts these ordinances, it's just like any other zoning development or land use development. It's up to a developer to figure out how to do that. And I've sent Katie some examples. What some communities do, just so you know, they actually take a step forward and they actually purchase the land, and then they will send out a request for proposals looking for a developer to partner with. The benefit of that is that the town can have more control, just like a developer would. There's a lot of potential downsides about that as well. The town has to invest money into that, and in some ways they're basically co-developers. So we're seeing more and more communities do that. That's still a fairly new thing. But it's really important to know that there are several different key players in this. We're all collectively defining what this ordinance is. It's going to be up to a developer to come forward. And what we're trying to do is to do this so it provides new options for Penfield. If you have the right developers who get involved with this, we've seen mixed-use developments around the country. Steve's working on one around Naples right now, and it's because developers see that this is something that they can make money on. what we need to do is make sure that it's enticing to a developer, but the product that comes out of that is something that enhances and improves quality of life in Penfield. So that's part of our discussion now. So a lot of things we don't know. We don't know exactly who that developer is going to be. We don't know exactly what they're proposing. And Katie and I were talking earlier today about this. Katie's had a grand idea where you could put a gondola, which would allow you to get from the, you could do parking up on top and you could come down. You know, that sounds like a pretty brilliant idea. I was going to say brilliant.
Wow, thank you.
All right.
Pass.
Sounds like a very costly, maybe not quite pragmatic idea, but if it doesn't work, it's because a developer looks at it and goes, I can't make money at that. It doesn't make sense. We've worked on projects around the country where they've done gondolas. Why? It makes sense. It works with the site. Financially, they figured out how to make it work. So part of it is we need to define this collective vision of what we want this to be, but not make it so tight and so prohibitive that a developer can't come in and propose something that's creative, does what you want it to do, just might do it in a slightly different way than we have in mind right now. So, no, there are no guarantees. Steve and I, we're on your side. We're all working on this together. Our job is to put down ideas, put them on paper like this, share it with you, and then for us to talk about it. Some of our ideas might be brilliant, like Katie's. Some of them may not be. But part of it is you put it down so that we can talk about it. The document that you all have looked at, I want to clarify, it's a 50% document. What does that mean? We've got a lot of work to do on that as we move forward. So this is a point of discussion where we stopped talking, we shared with you what we wanted to share with you, and now we need to start working on and figuring out what are the important parts of that. Is it doing what we want it to do? What parts are missing? What parts do we need to change? Does that make sense? Steve, any comments?
No, that's great. I think now that we have something to look at and review, we can start to make sure that the values, we talk in generalities so much through the process about what a mixed-use development is. The nuts and bolts of this guideline really are what the go-bys are to give it form. And so it's important that they're grounded in your input, and the review is important. So this is really a great opportunity for you all to well, and the way this is going to be structured is to get together informally, discuss amongst yourselves what matters, and give us good feedback. And we've got a way to do that that's well structured and hopefully will be successful. And we encourage you all to engage with each other and with us and with the staff here, as we're all going to be together to give you ideas.
We're all individually, we all have our own ideas of what will work and what doesn't work. What we're looking is feedback from you, and based upon that feedback, we will sit down and have a lot more discussions, and we'll come back with another draft. And then we'll look at that and we'll review that again. So this is an iterative process that we're going through. Hopefully all of you have looked at the document pretty well right now. Very good. There are 3 different questionnaires or information sheets that Katie sent out. I want to clarify what those were and clarify what we're not going to do today. We don't care about editing right now. If we misspelled words and you want to mark it up on a sheet, that's cool. Let us know. We'll find it. But between now and the next draft, we'll spend hundreds of hours actually editing, checking for grammar, checking for spelling, making sure the page numbers are right. So those are all the little editorial details that we'll spend a lot of time on. You have a sheet that, and we ask you to just, we're not going to talk about that today. Tell us your general comments. I really like the green, or I wish the green was blue, or the font's too small, or the whole document's terrible, and we should, you know, whatever it is, share those thoughts with us. Those are important to us. You find editorial comments, you don't like the writing style, any of those things, by all means, put that down and share that with us. But that's really not what we're going to talk about today. If you look at the document, there are several different chapters. And there are two fundamental chapters that we need to talk to you all about in your input. One of them is the mixed-use development. I forgot what chapter it was. Chapter 4, which is basically the mixed-use ordinance. That is the fundamental need of what we're doing.
Let me interrupt. We do have some hard copies here as we start to talk about this. If we want to reference, we need a hard copy to do this and don't far end starting to interrupt. Do a handouts of the forms and stuff. Sorry, Jim.
That's okay.
But starting to look at the pages and documents and flipping through.
If you already have a hard copy and this one that we've given to you, we just ask that you need it here for the next group. So we can't reproduce.
Try to print off a limited number. We actually went out to see what it would cost to get it printed, and it was over $1,100 just to get a hard copy done for this group and the 250 groups. And we worked out our Xerox machine a little bit in our office and tried to minimize the cost and everything else. So we tried to not get to everybody, but at least minimize their expenditures.
So section 4, like I said, that is the fundamental need of what we're doing. And we've talked a little bit about it, and Steve will tell you there are two fundamentally different approaches to this, and we've gone back and forth. The first version we put together with this was very detailed, had a lot of dimensional requirements. And I think we thought that really wasn't getting at the essence of what we were trying to do. So what we've tried to do is back off of that and simplify that and say, you close your eyes and you say, this is what we want to happen there. Does that document do two things? Does it allow it to happen, number one? And does it lay a framework that strongly encourages it to happen? Those are the two things that we're trying to do. So the first version of this was probably, good gosh, how much longer? 4 or 5 times longer. And we've continued to back up and try to simplify it. So we need to talk a lot about that today. That is the fundamental ordinance that's going to apply for every mixed-use district that you have within the town boundaries. So you have 4 that we're talking about. If the town decides to do 2 or 3 more later, the idea is that ordinance applies to all of them. It's the basic foundation of what you're trying to do. And then for you all, what's your chapter? Chapter 6? So chapter 6 specifically addresses Manitou Lake. And if you notice, it's not terribly long. Again, the first version was much longer, and we tried to back up and simplify it. And it's the fundamental question of what do you want to see there, what will you allow, and what are you strongly encouraging. So those are the 2 chapters that we want to talk about today. Does that make sense? We've, how many groups do you want, Mark? 2 or 3?
Usually like 4 or 5 people each year.
Okay, well, let's do 3 groups. That's what we originally decided. What we would like to do is break everybody up into 3 groups. We're going to kind of float around and, sit in and help in the discussions and help answer questions and directions. But we really want each small group to sit down, and if you look, whichever one you want to start with, we would suggest you start with section 4. And what you want to do is you want to really look at all of the things that are in section 4. But there are some things that are probably more important than others, some of your priorities. we need to hear from you about what those are. What makes sense to you, what does not. So what we're going to do is break up into small groups, have you all basically go through section 4 and then go through section 6. And tell us what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Yes, please.
I could use some guidance here before we break up. I mean, I've gone through your document. There's a lot of redundancy. I mean, we talked about the same thing, over our meetings here.
Right.
I think we all kind of pretty much got the foundation. It seems to me that I'm a little confused about my role in this or our role in this. It seems that it's been decided that these are multi-use districts, so that's what's going to happen. It's clear to me that you guys are drilling down the details, are capable of it. You love this stuff, and the nuts, the bolts, the washers are all in here, and it exceeds my knowledge ever on this subject. And I get that. I trust you guys and like that. Some of the dynamics involved, it seems, are opposed to me. A developer is going to go for the least amount of risk and the quickest or greatest return on investment, probably, or at least trend to that extreme.
Yes.
We, as a resident of the area, are going to go for the most amount of control and the tightest specifications, and don't you dare do anything, unless it's pre-approved and understood what it's going to do, right? So it seems like there's two opposing dynamics involved in this. The town body, I'm not sure where they stand. I don't know what the town body does because I don't know the agenda of the town body because I'm not versed in those things. From a management and control standpoint, it seems to me rules are meant for the downside. I mean, if I write enough rules, I'm going to have a lot of control over the situation. If it's a bright blue sky, sunny day, I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to let them go, and maybe I'll rewrite them and let it go up. But I want the safety net there. If it's a stormy, rainy day, I want to be able to control the situation and get out of it. Right? So, I mean, that's my sort of my altitude perspective on this thing. I don't know how much control. So I'm kind of using this as open therapy for me to try and straighten my head out of it and get out of it. But
It's a very good, absolutely understanding comment. Let's do this. The one thing, so we'll simplify it very quickly. We have a developer on one side. We have the town and all stakeholders and residents of the town.
okay.
Developers like to do what they know how to do to make money. From the town standpoint, big changes are scary. And the one given about what we're doing is we're doing something that makes everybody nervous. This is a change for the town. You haven't done these before, so from the town resident standpoint, you're not quite sure what's going to come out of that. Tighter controls give you a better feeling for what's going to come out of that, right? The other side of it, from a developer standpoint, you're right. They have, and they is the generic drawing there. There's a general idea for a developer. They have a pretty good idea of what kind of mix of uses and what kind of pipe and what kind of materials they can do to make money. We're asking them to do something different. We're saying the status quo of what we've done before doesn't work here. We want something a little bit different. The reality is not all developers will be comfortable with that. We work with the developer, yeah. That's the nature of the beast. We understand that.
I get that too.
And there's some developers who will be more comfortable with it than others. It is hard because we had that discussion. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of rules in there. What we think we have are really important, big rules. So, but I do think part of it is we need to hear from you all. What are you comfortable with? How much flexibility are you willing to give to some degree the developer and the town staff, town board who's going to review this to make sure that what's coming out of it is something that's consistent with the basic principles of mixed use?
Well, aren't you asking how far, how liberal I'll be in the pursuit of making money? Because I'm not interested in making money. That's not my agenda.
I don't think necessarily that's, I mean, I think that's, the way I would look at it is change. There will be change and there will be growth and there will be development pressure. That exists, as we understand, already in the community. I think what we're trying to do is to guide that in a way that yields the best outcome for the community. So
I'm with you. I'm not
yeah.
disputing that. And I think you guys are doing great work. I just don't know what, if we're presented with two channels, two options by you guys, we can do it. I don't know what other options are out there. I mean, is it feasible that the town would buy the property and then control it more tightly? I mean, these are all areas of government and policy and procedure that I'm not aware of, and I'm not equipped to deal with.
yeah, typically when we look at these kinds of things, we don't have any prejudice over who owns the land, over what the approach for the development is. There's a lot of different ways it could happen. Could be a public-private partnership, could be private development. In the case of Route 250 corridor, it's most likely going to be multiple developers because of the characteristic of land ownership. And some will be aggregated, some won't be. What we're interested in is establishing design standards that ignores who the developer is or who the owner is or any of that, and focuses on what the outcome is to the community. And we want to do it in such a way that we're not creating guidelines that are so onerous and so over-specified that they refuse to be able to adapt to what tomorrow's development may look like.
Sure.
So,
And I'd like to add that real quick. Part of your job is not the how. That's not what you're doing. Your job is the what. So once it's built, doesn't matter who funded it, who built it, who owns it. Once it's done, what do you want it to be like? What are the basic characteristics that you want out of it?
How could I possibly have a voice in any of this? I mean, you guys have the experience, you have the understanding, you have the perspective, and what you've said is, you've repeated what you've said a number of times, your examples, they're all beautiful, they're all great, they're all wonderful. My nature drives me to risk management and say, okay, great, I mean, if it all works, this is good, but what happens if it doesn't work, and what's the downside at the end? And therefore I go to the rule book because that gives me some management and control. And quite frankly, within reason, I'm not afraid of scaring off the majority of developers because I don't want the majority of developers involved in Manitou Lake. And really my interest is Manitou Lake. I mean, Route 250, within your professional standards and structure, build an Eastview Mall out there. I mean, do whatever you want to do. It's wonderful, great. Let's go develop and do stuff. But Manitou Lake is different,
Well, it's a good point. It's talking about just Manitou Lake.
That's
Manitou Lake, very different than 250. 250 is, Steve said, there's a high likelihood there's going to be a bunch of developers who are involved.
Sure.
Manitou Lake, I would think there's a pretty high likelihood of one major developer who wants to do that. There are a lot of questions on Manitou Lake. We don't know. We don't know what the geology is. We don't know what the soils are. We don't know from a structural standpoint what it's going to take to build something in there. You'd have to get a geotech to come in there and check the stability of slopes. So there's a whole bunch of things that we don't know.
Excuse me. And there's a couple of things we do know.
Yeah.
There's a gun club.
Sure.
There's one method of ingress egress.
Right.
And there's about 35 acres of potentially maybe developable property.
Well, there's gonna be a trade-off, and we talked about this earlier. Let me give you a really quick scenario. Anything is doable. I mean, it's not that, for example, we can't build there because the subway simply isn't sufficient. We can do that almost anywhere. The problem is it's expensive. And as you said earlier, for a developer, if a developer's gonna do that, they're gonna have to be pretty confident that economically they can make money out of it. So in that case, if they have to build a really big foundation, then you could say, well, in that case, they want a bigger building in order to have more square footage to justify the cost of doing that. That's problematic because there's not a lot of room there. A big building would require a lot of parking. So it's not as simple as saying, well, let's restrict the height of the building and that solves it all. It's not necessarily the size of the building, it's all the little pieces that fit together. But you're right, we know there's some major limitations there. But you kind of have to put yourself in the view of, if we just do this, if Katie gets $umpteen million and goes out and buys the whole thing and sets a pot of money and says, all right, let's build this thing. What do you want? What would you want to see? What do you want to see come out of that? And then what we've tried to do is take that broad idea of what could happen there and develop a framework that, like I said earlier, number one, allows it, and then number two, prevents the things that you very clearly said you don't want. And I'm not sure if that's helping, but on Manitou, let's face it, there are a couple of key issues. Height is an issue, right? For some people, the height of structures is going to be an issue. The amount of space that you develop is going to be an issue. Access to the lake is going to be an issue. Those are things we've all heard from you all.
Connectivity outside the district to the surrounding areas is an issue.
Right. And so part of it is, you all have told us before things that are important to you. One of the first questions to us is, with what we've put together, does it address that? And if you think it does, even if things are fuzzy, then that's a big step in the right direction. If you think it doesn't, then we need to look at each one of those issues and talk about what those are. And then the next time, at the next step, we go back to your comment about, well, more rules. If we can define 4 basic rules and we all go, yeah, that's it. That's basically what we want. Everything else are small details. We'll let Katie and Mark and Kaz work that out later. Then we're good. If you look at the 4 basic rules and go, it's still too fuzzy. I need more specific details here. Then the next version will add more detail and tighten it up a little bit. One thing we've got to be careful of, though, is one of the mistakes that we've seen over and over is mixed-use guideline or requirement ordinances. If they get too tight, then developers either can't do it or they can't do it well. So you've got to be careful. You do. You want it to be tight enough to give you the vision you want, but not so tight that, I'm the first one to admit, I'm not a real estate specialist. Not really what I do. So I think it would be a mistake for me to write an ordinance that would tell a developer how they have to address it from a real estate standpoint. It's not what I do best. So me doing that, there's a greater likelihood of it not working than for me to let a developer who knows that much better than I do to do that. You are going to have, we've heard, one of the comments we heard earlier is, well, it sounds like you guys are going to let developers do whatever they want. That's not the point. There's a very strong, there has to be, once we get done with this, a very strong review process. These are the basic guidelines of mixed use that we clearly said we want. When a developer submits a proposal, And we talked a little bit about process, about the steps that they have to go through. That's going to be a long, iterative, I don't mean to, it's going to be an iterative process where there's going to have to be a lot of discussion to make sure that what a developer is proposing is acceptable to the town. So it's not just you all check off on this and the developer's going to come up and do a developer and the town's automatically going to stand. There's going to be an iterative review process that, and I don't know how you all.
Yeah, that's something that I've talked to Jim and Steve about, and that's really something that, from a staff perspective, from an administrative perspective, we come up with a suggested approach, and then we provide that to the committee. That, whatever that recommendation ends up being in the final document that goes to the town board, will be within this manual, because that is a very important component. If someone were interested in the property, we want to make sure that the process is clearly defined, so that it's not just, whoever happens to pick up the phone or stand at the counter that day. We want it clearly defined so that there's no misunderstanding of what the process to develop within these two mixed-use districts are. We're just not there yet. On the level of importance, we need to get to the gut. It absolutely will be included, but that's not really a hard part of this project. We will get that in another draft at a later date, but at this point, we need to talk about the hard limits. After walking the property, after looking at the photographs that were taken from the site walk, what are your thoughts on the parameters that are within this document?
Well,
have we hit them, or are we not?
And I think just following up on your comment earlier about it, responding to your concern for, well, if it's a clear day, we'll just kind of open the gates. Right now, the consultants and also the town board, they've had interaction with the developer for the last 2 years now who wants to do something on one of our properties. And in fairness, they do not meet the criteria of what we're looking for a mixed-use district. I mean, it's a nice project in its own right, but it's not, it doesn't have the components all the way we're looking to have the components in place to allow for a development like that. And as a result, we've basically told them that their proposal, as it stands right now, does not really commit to what we're trying to do. And as a result, they're going to have to do some things to make it more in keeping with a mixed-use district versus a multiple-use district. And I think the town board and the consultants were polite about it, but they were very firm about the fact that it does not meet the criterion for a mixed-use district at this point.
And we also talked about specific ways that you could go about doing that. It's not a broad general.
I have tried to give them some direction. Whether they follow that direction is going to be up to them, but right now, I think both on your parts and the town board, the answer right now is, as it's proposed, it's not what we're looking for. So they have been very, very cautious going through the process of trying to get to where they need to be on these properties.
Steve and I were talking just a few minutes ago, because the project he's working on now, and I worked on one last year, it's like that. A couple of people said, well, if you do this and you have the restrictions that you have on square footage that you have now, you can't put a Wegmans in there. Well, you can't put a Wegmans in the way Wegmans normally does. But down south, we have one of the big markets there is Publix. Publix are now actually developing new versions of their markets intended specifically for these smaller mixed use. They're much smaller square footage. The amount that the types of supplies, materials, whatever that they have in there, it's a little bit different. But they specifically are doing those to fit within mixed use. So that's a situation where they looked at these new models and kind of said, we can make money. They adjusted the way they've been doing it, and they're being very successful with those. And we're blown away by Wegmans. I'd love to see, I have a tough time thinking Wegmans is not going to be able to look at mixed-use opportunities and go, we can't figure out what to do with that.
But there's a level of frustration on my part, because I don't have the sophisticated knowledge that you do. I take, and again, I'm focused on Manitou Lake and not the Route 250 corridor. When I look at Manitou Lake, I look at the price tag behind it, and I say, okay, here's a pretty limited opportunity that's going to require some significant economics to develop. And the way that you do that is with volume or density. And I don't think that that property, as it stands now, with one ingress egress, and with questionable soil and height concerns, is going to be able, I don't have, that's a pretty limited knowledge area that I don't have. I mean, that's sophisticated stuff.
Well, it's volume, density, or premium. I mean, there's also a value proposition, because Manitou Lake is not just any piece of dirt in miscellaneousville. Manitou Lake is a special environment, extremely special, and so much of its value is derived by the unique character in which it sits. So,
granted, and that's what I'm saying, you don't have the volume or density. I mean, you're not going to probably do that there. So you're talking about premium, which is a real narrow target.
Well, can I make a suggestion?
Of course.
If I was in your shoes, if I was sitting there and you were sitting here, and if I said exactly the same thing, I'm not comfortable with where we are with this. This is too big an asset to the town for us to move something forward when we're not comfortable with it. I think in that situation, you can do a couple things. Number one, look at the basics, see if it makes sense. And if you say, well, it kind of makes sense, but it's outside my league and I don't know. The part that's going to make the huge difference is the review process. So then, if I was in your shoes, I would ask, I would put all my emphasis on how is that review process going to get done? We haven't talked about it, but maybe this committee is there. I mean, one of the things that Steve absolutely could do is we can bring in, and I'm talking about, this is a hypothetical, and then I'm talking about specifics. Hypothetical, we can bring in plans and show you that, and then show you what about it works from a mixed use standpoint, what about it does not. And that's kind of what we've done on the other mixed use. So if you have this committee together and you're part of the review process, for example, if there's a proposal coming in, and put it on the table in front of you and talk about it. Is it, Jim and Steve said it ought to do this. Does it look like it does? Yeah, that's good. One of the things that we've talked about is as the town moves forward, they need a really clearly defined process. I mean, with a checklist of saying, does it do this? I'm not sure that it does that. So if that's the case, let's look at that closer. And if that's the case, what specific kinds of recommendations do you make to do that? So you can move it forward even if you're not completely comfortable with the knowledge base and with the foundation that you have. But like I said, if I was in your shoes, I'd want to make sure I had lots of opportunities to review and continue the discussion so as my level of understanding grew. And it will for everyone. Everyone in Penfield who is involved with the mixed use. Once you do the first one, your level of understanding is going to go up dramatically. But, as you say, you don't want to do the first one on Manitou Lake and then have it be a disaster and learn from the mistakes of that and apply it to other places.
Well, and that's
want
where,
the first one to work.
that's the two comments I have in regards to that is that I just don't know how you put Route 250 and Manitou Lake together in the same book, because I'm not sophisticated enough to understand that. And the second thing is, management and control says write a lot of rules and let people come for variances, when it comes time to develop, because I'm not familiar with the process.
All of these things have some measure of performance associated with them. So focus on the measure of performance. You don't want loud noises, or you don't want to be able to see something in Manitou Lake, so that has an associated building height with it. I mean, to me, that's the way to get to the restrictions without making the document too onerous that nobody's going to want to develop there. Everything that you have mentioned that you have concerns about, there is some performance measure that can be incorporated into this, if it's not already, that protects what you're concerned about. I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very important, because it comes down to values. It comes down to the values that are ground in the community and ground in those pieces of property, and the context. So, and you guys are here steering this committee because you understand we spent time here, but you live it every day, and the outcomes that occur here need to be born out of your input, because ultimately it's what happens there is going to become part of the fabric of this community, and it's very important that it reflects the values that you all believe to be important. The values, those things that are maybe less specific, we don't expect you to know whether 40 feet is too short and 50 feet is too tall. We can help you with that, because that's the world we live in, that we can help guide some of those criteria decisions. But when you look at this, what we want to know is the issue of height addressed? Are we addressing it properly or sufficiently? And whether it's 40 or 50 feet is really immaterial. That will help with that. But we want to know, are those values that you've expressed in our previous meetings, as you go through this, do you feel like they're there? And we'll work together, as Katie said, in subsequent iterations, we'll work together to make sure that the details manifest themselves in a way that that it reflects the values that you all are bringing to this process.
It's a very good point. I mean, and I think what we tried to do was to develop the metrics for the key things that we heard you say. And I think what we're looking for you all is to tell us whether that makes sense, or whether there are parts of it you just say, no, we said this was important, you didn't talk about that. And then we can talk about how best to do that, what that level of detail is.
I'd be interested, before we break up into groups though, and I know we asked if you guys had any comments on the public information meeting. I'm kind of interested in what the site visit, we weren't here for it, but if there were any discussions or any takeaways or anything that, of those of you who were there, maybe before we break apart into small groups, just to have a round table for those of you, just what your impressions were upon visiting the site, and what came out of that, and the discussions that you all have with each other while you're walking around and checking things out. I'd just throw that question out to you guys. How was it, and were there any things that jumped out that ought to be a precursor for further discussion today?
I thought, number one, there was more developable area than I thought there was before we took the walk. It was surprising to me how much area is down there that you could feasibly develop, given certain circumstances such as soil, ability and all that. And I do agree with you. There has to be a secondary means of, or alternate means of access to that site. I think we all agreed that as we were walking around. I think the initial reaction was maintaining a public access around the perimeter of the pond is imperative. I mean, I think everybody should enjoy that. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this. We could easily keep that at R120 and have a bunch of developers come in and build 30 houses down there and take away everybody's right to the pond if they wanted to do that. I think our key is to try and have the public enjoy that pond where it can. There was great access around the perimeter of the pond. They've done a great job of maintaining it in terms of pedestrian. But I think that's the focal point of the project, or the district. The focal point is the pond itself. Like you said, it's the unique portion of that property. So the key component is to have the public enjoy the ability to get to that pond, or have the ability to get into the ponds one way or another, whether it's kayaking or canoeing or whatever the case may be. So that should be a major component to look at. You talk about the height. I was kind of shocked that 90 and 120 feet weren't horrible. I guess my personal feeling was I'd like to see less than 120 feet, just because as you got to 120 feet, you were starting to get to the top of the tree line or near the top of the tree line, and I guess I'd feel more comfortable being at 90 than 120. But again, it all comes down to, if you build those kind of buildings, you have to have parking to accommodate it. You have to have green space to accommodate it. And if you don't have that, then certainly you're not going to be able to build that. And depending upon soils on the site, you might not be able to. But, and certainly somebody like Dan, who deals with people all the time in terms of moving people, if I go there and I want to live there, or I want to shop there and I can't park, I'm not staying. I'll go somewhere else. So if you don't have adequate parking, and who knows better than the people that are developing, that's where you get to. But certainly it's going to be a problem, because I don't see, looking at the mapping in that area, how you get a secondary means of ingress and egress to that property without begging the county of Monroe for some type of cross-access over the park area, which they're not excited about doing, or coming to some conclusion along Blossom Road that you can get out safely without having to come to Thomas Cove Road and make a hairpin turn to get back out onto the road. I just don't know how you do that, but those are things to look at.
There could be a second means of access off of Old Penfield Road, like closer to the Panorama area. Remember when we were walking around?
You'd have to do a
The part
minor-
where you turned to me and said, hey, there's a lot more area here than I thought.
And you're right, Kate, and you'd have to do some maybe cuts and fills here and there to get there, but you could do it. You
Yeah.
could do it.
Yeah, that's doable.
I'd like to see something alternate to Penfield Road, or Old Penfield Road, because it is constrictive. As a matter of fact, when we left that night, we were leaving at the rush hour, to make a right or left-hand turn out onto Penfield Road down by the plaza. I made the left-hand turn, went up the hill, went down North Landing Road, and went down Browncroft, and then came up Browncroft Creek to get home. It was easier than waiting in line to get down to Penfield and Panorama.
That was the 490 was closed that night.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. There was an accident,
It's never like.
and it did drive a lot of traffic down that hill. That's a very good point. Yeah, that is a good point.
One of the things that was brought up too was maybe some kind of access to the Daisy Flower Mill or that part of the property. That's not necessarily the park. If you can get site distances and that to work.
That's what occurred to me too, is, discussions, bringing Monroe County Parks in, discussing with them, some swap or some sharing or.
Did have some
an
initial
easement or-
conversations with them, and they weren't excited about it. They basically said if it's a private development accessing off of public lands, they're not interested. That was from Dave Ronaldo, who's on the committee. He's not here tonight to respond back, but, I mean, that doesn't mean that's the end of the conversation, but just starting off, we need to pursue either other opportunities or locations or.
Yeah, I don't think that should be the end of the conversation.
Yeah,
Other
right.
things not, that would include dedication of parkland, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, there was-
Some incentives, there's got to be more discussion. I
And
think.
the guidelines that we develop aren't necessarily going to, we're not going to develop a guideline or design standard that's predicated on an infrastructure investment or some secondary point of access or egress. That's going to, that will have to be part of the ultimate solution, but that's not something that we're going to prescribe in any specific way. We're more interested in the outcome of what's developed, and there are a lot of external factors that may or may not create a solution that's viable, and traffic access, visibility from the public edge, all of those things may be part of it.
So the traffic access seems to be a big component of this. So are you envisioning in this document that the end of our recommendations would be something to the effect of indicating that its access to this area is a concern and it should be adequately evaluated, and perhaps a second means could be provided in one of two other locations, and then it's essentially up to that developer to crunch the numbers and demonstrate that the traffic works with the one access, or he negotiates with the county, or, I mean, that's beyond the scope of this document,
Yeah,
correct?
And I would say the one thing that, let me back up for a second and get to your comment, Michelle. Things are interlinked. A developer can't just do one thing without the other. For example, if there is, as Kaz said, even a 90-foot building, it's a lot of square footage. That square footage has specific requirements on parking. Once you have a 90-square-foot building and you try to figure out, how am I going to make parking work, that's problematic. And let's say you can. Once you have that amount of parking there, then your ingress, egress is a huge issue. That's a big red flag at that point. So we won't make specific design recommendations such as a potential entrance here or a potential entrance there, in part because it's set up to address that. If they do and do it the other way, if they do a very small building with very small parking, then most likely you won't need another entry in order to make the transportation work. As the amount of square footage goes up and the parking goes up, that becomes more problematic. That's part of the review process. And that's something that you'll talk about from a transportation standpoint.
But how do you deal with phase development? For Manitou, maybe it's not an issue. If it's a single developer and he has a multiple phase project, you can kind of look at all of it. I mean, it's more applicable to the 250, where if we aren't all headed in the same direction on the same page with access roads and secondary roads, how you're kind of leaving it up to the next developer in line to try to tie in, or it doesn't seem like it's very well planned or thought out in that particular instance, or there's the opportunity for it to not be well planned or thought out.
Yeah, it needs to be. The guidelines are going to dictate that there's a framework created, that adjacent properties have to play well together. That's part of mixed use. That's part of the growth of old historic places. They have come together, and there's synergy between adjacent parcels. That's very important. At Manitou, it could very well, while it may not be different owners and it may not be, in the small discrete parcels like it is in 250, it may well be various multiple project phases. A project may start, ownership may change, the whole development program may change. It's a totally adaptive plan at that point, and the guidelines need to be such that they don't discriminate or discourage what may want to happen at some point in time in the future. But we're not going to prescribe the nature of the traffic improvements. We just can't know what those need to be at this point in time.
I do think it's a good point, it's a good discussion. What we've clearly heard from you all based upon your view there, that is a big concern. I think what you're hearing from us is we're very hesitant to make specific design recommendations. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is we shouldn't be, the town, shouldn't be designing the site and making specific requirements on how it needs to be done. So I think there may be, the solution's probably something in the middle. We need to very clearly say that that's an issue that needs to be addressed without getting into the specifics of exactly what those are. So maybe we can take another look at that and see if we can, going back to your comment, Jim, about adding more detail and more specificity to it without crossing the line where we're not comfortable with it.
So along those lines, in reading the document, what popped in my head was more architecture related as to, we talk about uses and we talk about the connectivity. But I sit there and I think, okay, so let's say we make a recommendation that 90 feet is okay. But a 90-foot building that looks like this, in my viewpoint, is not okay. Some of the images that you've shown us with the step-down features and things like that. So without getting too prescriptive, is there a way that more of that could be added in? In materials even? Because
there's some basic approaches. For example, the height. There's specific wording that we can use that talks about stair stepping the buildings down, and part of that is that vertical to horizontal ratio and the angle. So we can certainly do that, and I think that's a good example. Specific areas like that where you go, well, I like the basic idea, but it's just way too open, and I can't really see it, and I'm not comfortable with that. Can you give us more information on that?
That is a perfect example. We need more detail on what the architectural forms are appropriate, and if that's missing, if you believe that's missing, and it may very well be, then we'll take a look in the next iteration. We'll make sure that we're addressing not only just the dimensional criteria of building height, but also form and materials to the point where we're not overly prescriptive.
And it's a 50% document, so I'll tell you right now, there are a number of places where I think that kind of level of detail is missing.
Yeah.
But part of it is missing because we haven't had much of a discussion about what exactly you guys want to see, what you're comfortable with. So before we talk about stair stepping at 90 foot, it makes sense to talk about 90 foot. Is that If we're talking about 30 feet, then that's a whole different discussion.
Right, sure. This is for the committee to think about and, talk when we do the breakout sessions is you could take one use and you could design it architecturally to look two totally different experiences if you were to go into that building. Think about, I don't know, nothing's coming to my mind. Oh, the new Midtown building keeps popping in my head. I've seen some of the, has anybody seen what that's going to look like? I've seen some of the sketches, and it's not something that I would pick out of a book and be like, oh, I want my downtown to look like this, but it's just, it's a different experience as opposed to what the old building looked like, but they could be the same exact uses. So if you could put some thought behind that in my head, our code today is very restrictive and this is permitted, blah, blah, blah. But we don't have anything in our ordinance that says it's permitted, but it needs to look like this. It needs to meet these intents. Whereas I think that that's missing, and if we start thinking in that fashion, less permitted uses and more of, what does this need to look like? It needs to be, we use the buzz term, human scale. What's that like? Where have you been in your life experience where you really enjoyed interacting in a public space? What about that made that an enjoyable experience? Can we take anything out of that and add it into these districts that we're working on? And look at apartment buildings. And I don't know, I think we can all think of some.
What's the one we looked at over, do you know the one I'm talking about?
RIT, Park Point
Yes.
versus Cornell. Two very, very different approaches. You could even pick some of the apartment buildings in the St. Paul corridor. I'm just thinking, and compare that to Cornell Landing, for example. You could do townhouses so different. And one you could say, yeah, that meets the values that I want to see my Penfield, in my Penfield versus, that's not really what I was thinking. And Kaz always says, we don't know what we want, but we know what we don't want. So even if those conversations, at least it's something for us to start honing in on that final recommendation to the town board.
I think one of the things that I took away from that walk is how many people were already down there already, trespassing, using the site. There were so many people fishing that are already using it. So you start thinking, going, people that aren't even supposed to be down there are using it for something already. That's kind of an indication that, you want to definitely keep that outside edge open. And we talk about 8-foot boardwalk. I keep thinking 30-foot, make it more beach-like so people can get to it, put a pier out there that people can fish off. Because everyone you walk around, there's lots of people fishing. We were 15 feet from people. We rounded the bend and we noticed, hey, there are people right there that we didn't even know. We're just fishing off the corner there. And they're all over down there. They're being chased off.
Where are they coming from?
They're walking in from the park side, or they're just coming in and walking in.
Penfield Road, we passed the car on our way out.
But they know it's there already, and they're using it for those things. So that kind of, in my mind, says, hey, people are drawn to the water to use it for fishing, for bringing their kids down there fishing, things like that. And it's kind of telling you that people are already using it for that. That you want to definitely keep that open and available, and don't if you put a dock out there, make sure everyone can use it. Make it a pier size where you can put 40 people out there if they want to go fishing or something like that. That's open to the public and not $5 to walk down to the end to stare at the water and then walk back. That's that kind of thing.
Does those of you who looked at the document in section 6, does it do that? Are you comfortable that the way it's worded now, it will protect public access all the way around the lake to the point that you described?
Well, when you say public access, are you talking about the perimeter of the lake or actual jumping into the lake?
I think that could be either.
Good question.
Or use of the lake, I should say. Because
Well,
when I read this, I'm not sure, it's kind of a broad statement. Public access to the lake via trails, boardwalk, pier, or other elements.
I don't think we were clear on it. And then, so part of that is if we make that statement, then it's going to be up to Katie to interpret what that means. And I think that's a perfect example of what we're looking for from you all. I mean, do we want people to get access to the lake itself, i.e. boat launches, whether it's canoe and kayaking or swimming or whatever that is.
Where I wouldn't want to see it as a motorboat, power boat facility. If you want to
So-
put a canoe out there, that's one thing, but I would say I wouldn't want gasoline engines out there.
Now, my question is that for everyone? You don't want anyone? So a developer can't put a motorboat or,
Maybe.
I think it's too small for it.
That's what that is.
I think
then,
an electric boat would be fine.
then my question is, does the ordinance say that? I don't think it
No,
does.
it doesn't.
So in that case, that's a perfect example of just one line thing. Don't want motorized vehicles are not
craft,
allowed. There you go, that's it.
Or what size sailboats?
Not enough wind down there for much of anything.
Well,
anyways.
Jack Rosenbach told me that they, was it Jack?
Yeah, it
Jack
was
told me
Jack.
that they had,
And I was there.
what, 18-foot sailboats?
18, they're ideal 18s. We had 10 boats down there plus a bunch of kids in the Optimus sailboat. Sailing around with my then 4-year-old in a little tiny 6-foot sailboat, and then the gun club had a tournament weekend. I think it might have been a handgun tournament, and it was the most bizarre experience of my life. But I have to tell you, it was so much fun. We had a lot of people down there, and the kids were swimming in the water, and it was really neat because the depth. I mean, right off that where the balloons were set up, if you kind of head towards the water's edge, but towards Thomas Cove Road, it just drops straight off right there. And we had a windward mark set up for the regatta that we sailed, and the people sitting on shore were throwing ice at people as they're rounding the marks. I mean, that can all happen in that type of unique environment. Whether it's certifying deep water diving, something like that, things that are not readily accessible in our area.
That's one thing we heard from somebody, that deep water and a local pond, and he said that pond is up to 100 feet deep in the far end where it's dredged, so scuba diving or something, could be a rare find or something in this area that may not be a big impact or noise generator, but it may be a great opportunity other than going out into Lake Ontario or somewhere deep. And I don't even know how deep Lake Ontario is unless you get farther out, but.
About a
maybe
mile out, there's a 300-foot shelf that just drops, and that's where all the fish hang out.
Well, it's interesting because this is a discussion, we've talked about land use, well, this is an asset. The lake almost becomes a civic asset. How do we want that civic asset to be engaged by this potential? Because if a lot of the value is derived through that lake, then I think that what you're saying and what I'm hearing is we need to explore how to preserve its value and identify but not overly restrict its potential use.
I think also defining the public-private areas. I mean, maybe it's not all public, but I mean, if obviously you're running a dive club out of there and you have, people scuba diving out of there and a developer is using it for that, obviously they're deriving a value from that, versus me coming in and jumping in and using that same space. Obviously he's paying for it, the public, versus me coming with my kayak and, paddling around out there, maybe defining percentage of the lake that's used by the public versus private. I mean, obviously access around it, but there may be other opportunities where they may be renting kayaks or canoes or having those type or fishing equipment or what else down there. But
Well, that's a good point. I will say this, if you ask me point blank the way the ordinance is written now, Andy, going back to your comment, we were not clear on that. So I think a developer could pretty clearly say, we provided access all the way around the lake, but the lake is ours. And if that's not what you want, if that's not what you need, it doesn't say that right now. But again, that's a really simple 1 or 2 line thing. We'll write that. Just tell us that's what you want. That's important.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would just offer that, maybe that's really diving in too deep for this meeting right now, but I think those are things that we need to think about with whatever document gets produced for Manitou Lake, because it's going to be a big deal. I mean, there are already people, pressuring the town for, kayak rentals and open swim and sailing and all that. And they have good ideas based on, merits and what's important to them, but that just struck me when I read this. I'm like, boy, Dan could totally interpret this sentence much differently than I could.
Yeah. That's
and
a problem.
I think we need to discuss that, and as a committee or the Manitou committee, just kind of decide what are the recommendations.
I wonder if we should, I'm just thinking of that, the value of breaking into small groups is you can have these discussions more quickly, can brainstorm ideas down, and in the last 15 minutes or so, bring all these ideas up, because we're able to talk about them one at a time right now, but I think if we break into small groups, you guys can drill down to these issues that matter quicker, and I think that there's a lot of value in that. But I think these have been really valuable prompts to kind of help identify the kinds of value decisions or discussions that are going to be helpful for us going forward. So maybe that would be a good time to...
Yeah, and I was going to say, Andy, you said maybe we're drilling down too deep. I don't think we are at all. I mean, you as a group, let's just say this, you have 2 more iterations of this. You make comments, we're going to do a draft, we're going to give it back. You make comments, we're going to do a draft, give it back. So the more we catch now, the more we don't have to worry about next time. We can focus on the other little details that don't make sense.
Okay.
So, yeah, by all means, share us any comments. And, my wife Angie, when she edits, she will just she'll put a big red circle around something and goes, this sounds wacky. That's all she needs to do. So if you don't know what it is or why, but you don't know what it means, but it just sounds weird, just circle it and say, this needs help. Something here is not working. And then we'll have a discussion with staff, and we'll figure out what it is, and we'll give you the next version, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Great. So how many do we have? How many committee members do we have?
Possibly 3 groups.
Yeah,
And we have worksheets down there. We can grab the worksheets that'll kind of help guide our discussions in the groups and work with those.
So we were thinking of just one group down here at the end, and then one over at the chairs over on that side, and then one over the chairs on this side.
Grab the worksheets and
Do we want to split, do we want certain Manitou Lake committee members, like one in each committee, so it's not, there seems to be
Yeah.
more core committee members here than Manitou Lake committee members, so I just offer that we kind of divide the Manitou Lake committee members up into each group, so it's fairly represented.
So,
Cos doesn't want to
just
move.
going down, Iris, you're one group, Bill, you're another group, and Ruth, you're the 3rd group. And then Jim is our only other Manitou person. You can pick a group to go to. Yeah, let's do that. And then the rest of us are core members, so just split up equally. And just make sure staff is spread out. Thank you.
And as you're going through this, if you have just prompts or questions or things,
You're
just
fine. We can just-
shout out us, and we'll come
Thank you.
and just, we can help you deliberate or help you.
Are we answering these now, or are these just,
I think
we're
one
just
at a-
talking
I
about
think
the
it'll help.
document now?
Well, I mean, these may help lead your discussion,
Okay.
and you can take these home and fill them out if you want to fill them out at
Okay.
home.
Bill's doing over there, I'm
Just
just
thought
gonna
it
stay
kinda helped
here,
to-
and Ruth, you can stay right where you are if you want. And just toss a chair on the other side if you want, and,
Try and take about 30 minutes. It'll take us till about 6:15, and then we can have 15 minutes or so to wrap up.
Thanks.
Mark, do you wanna go with Bill's group?
Good.
Yeah. Still
Oh, are you really?
Okay,
It's brutal.
You got your papers?
some core people. AJ, you wanna join us? Dan?
I'll try.
Too many
I'll do whatever you want me to do.
You should have about 4, maybe 5 in one group.
Yeah, is that what we have?
Just do a quick count, I don't actually.
Yeah, 4 or 5 each.
And that's halfway close.
For each.
I'm not sure what it is.
Oh, no, wait, Dave, have Mark go over there so that we have a staff member, but that's fine, you guys can be the group of 5.
Where do you want me to go?
AJ, can you join us?
Where did Mark go?
Okay, so this one's top 3, that's one for us to
About
do at
6:15,
home.
we'll get him back. It was kind of, take 5 minutes.
Really the only
Okay,
thing,
so
Just the
4 and,
depending which way you want to look, either overall or Manitou.
yeah, both.
Yeah.
So mixed use versus, so,
Jim, what do you miss?
I am missing, yeah, maybe I've got, that.
The overall, do you like it, do you don't like it?
I got that.
Section 6 and section
well,
4.
the overall one is the one to do at home. We should concentrate on 4 and 6.
She didn't have a whole lot of notes on the overall.
Yeah, I'm missing 4.
Yeah.
So we're gonna keep the entire chapter?
Yeah, focus on 4 to 6.
To the town.
Or the town actually purchase the rights. I mean, there's all different kinds of ways to get through it, but a lot of it comes down to how does the town become the controlling body of the lake.
Just to make sure we're comfortable with this. And I think they're looking at just how it functions as a mixed-use district. Mixture of complementary land uses generated, obviously. Provide a zero level of flexibility for housing alternatives. And I think, and I just came, generally speaking, these districts are a majority of housing is residential versus commercial. Yes. The tenants not to create a new commercial district, local housing there and there. It is designed to be housing, it's designed to be housing that allows homeowners associations or some type of.
Personally,
method whereby
from the gun club's
public could
perspective,
access it and enjoy portions of it.
that low
Versus
was
just
our
having
kind
some
of-
guy come in like you and I and build 2 or 3 houses and say, hey, pond's ours, sorry, you guys are out. So I think, and I think that this is what they're talking about in terms of when you made that comment a few minutes ago, how's 250 different than Manitou? These are the components that you have to meet in order to be considered for development. And if you can't meet those components there, you're not going to be considered for a project. Now, those components are pretty nebulous in the sense that you have to have complementary uses, you have to have a level of flexibility of housing alternatives, you have to develop mixed-use areas that are safe and comfortable for pedestrians, because if you can't have a pedestrian component to it, it's not really a mixed-use district. You got to be able to move around and get throughout the district so that you can shop or you can visit your friends or family or whoever else is in there, and not have to have a heart attack in the process of doing it. That's the problem down here. Is the guy divided up townhouses from one end, he divided up apartments to another, he divided up some commercial, which was very minimal to speak of. It wouldn't serve your needs. And you had to walk like a mile and a half to get from one point to another before you ever got to a different user. I said, that's not mixed use. Mixed use is combining these things so that you can go in and enjoy all aspects of it. Right. That's why we're having a problem with this guy. This is the one down in the corner of 250 and Atlantic Avenue where the old gas station is, all that land to the north. Oh, yeah. There's a guy that wants to buy that land and develop it as, multi-housing uses. But they're not mixed use. They're not integrated with each other. He's got elderly housing here. He's got kids over here. Nobody's interacting with each other. They're all just kind of on their own, and that's not the intent of what we're trying to do.
There hasn't been a lot of market experience in this area.
Right.
The builders are going to shy away.
They are because generally speaking, in this area, elderly have not wanted to interact with younger people who are trying to go out and party and everything. They want a quiet setting.
Well, I haven't really had a choice either.
True. There haven't been any opportunities. Personally, I think that would be the death knell for me to just be with everybody my age and not have anybody younger come in and kind of stimulate my mindset for a few minutes during the week. But you're right. I think you're going to have that problem with local developers because they're not comfortable doing that.
It's the same with interrelated retail. Even a barber shop or a beautician shop or an attorney's office or anything within
a close proximity.
They've shown all these mixed-use buildings where you've got retail or commercial or office on the first floor, residential up above. It's a tough market for that.
It is. I think up until now, people who are in their 70s and 80s don't think about it that way. Although it surprises me because that's how most of them grew up. I mean, most of them grew up in city settings where you could walk down the street and buy an ice cream cone or get a haircut fairly easily without having to drive somewhere to do it.
But that was 50 years ago.
Well, the problem is, that's right. And 50 years ago, the suburbs started to develop.
Right, and you have Panorama Plaza there. I can't see a corner, a mom and pop grocery store in Manitou Lake ever surviving.
No, and that's not probably the right use for what's going on, what would be going down there. I would think, we were just talking a few minutes ago, my feeling is, number one, the components for Manitou Lake would be public access to and around the lake, number one. Secondly would be probably a mix of some type of housing development that's, it's got an association that would maintain the areas around it. Thirdly would be some kind of component. We were talking about the idea of maybe having some type of a spa or some type of getaway for a weekend down there to do it.
That brings up another problem. You want a mixture of flexibility of housing options. Someone said at one of these communities that Allen's Creek Valley is one of the most exclusive areas in the town. I see Manitou Lake housing being very exclusive.
And it could be, but if it's a mix of housing, you could have apartments down there, you could have high-end apartments. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be, low end, it doesn't have to be, it could be high end.
Honestly, I think it's utopian to think in those terms.
Well,
I bet the failure rate on mixed-use districts is much greater than the success rate.
Oh, it is, but I think if you're looking...
You've got to be targeted demographically, you've got to be upscale.
I agree.
You've got to have the money behind it.
Oh, I agree. I think it's going to have to be upscale for it to work. It's the land value alone will drive it as being an upscale project.
If you don't have the right retail in there that caters the demographic that lives there, you're dead.
I don't think it's got to be, you could possibly, but it's got to be a really destination type thing. I mean, you would have to have something that everybody will go there no matter where it is. It's kind of like LL Bean type of thing. It would have to be something that they don't care where it is, but they've got something that you want, so they'll go there. And I'm not so certain even retail necessarily is what you need there. I
think if you get the demographic in there that has the economics, they're going to be elitists by nature.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be interested in having a lot of people come through.
Well,
that's going to be a problem with public access.
But you're going to have public access. It's going to have to be the primary function of the district.
I agree.
I got real discouraged when we had that meeting in those ponds, and people were complaining about the Glenbrook ponds, complaining about kids coming in there and fishing. And it's a public pond. I mean, this is a neighborhood of $250,000 houses. You put $500,000 condominiums down there.
Well, and I don't look at this area as being like this one of these areas that you're going to have throngs of people going down there to fish or to do that. I mean, it's not going to be. I think you're going to find people that are going to want to just take a walk along a promenade or something, and then, maybe go down to the plaza and get an ice cream cone or something after they're getting an ice cream cone, and then go up to this place and hang out. They're going to have, and you talk about parking, you're going to have a parking area to accommodate visitors. I mean, there's going to be people that are going to come there just to walk.
Okay, well then
That could eat up some space.
Corbett's Glen Nature Park is extremely successful, and there are too many people down there. There's no place to park.
Right. Their parking needs are way out of whack with what they're doing there.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got this wonderful area, and you provide kayaking, and you provide scuba diving, and you provide sailing, and suddenly you're What's the lake? I don't know.
It's about 58 acres, something like that.
There's gonna be no room for the people who are gonna.
Well, and then you look at, I mean, God knows they're gonna go 90-story buildings, but let's assume that they had to do that to make it marketable. They might even go underground with parking for the buildings. They might have secure parking for the.
Really tough there with the water.
Well, yeah, depending on what the situation is. You're right. But you know what? They're doing it at Basil's. They're doing it down there. And I mean, that water level is right there, 3 feet lower than the basement. So, I mean, those are things you got to look at. I don't anticipate, I agree with you all, I don't anticipate that as being a retail destination per se. I just don't see that happening.
But I think you're right, Jim, in that we have general guidelines here, but the area is so unique that even the general guidelines don't affect it.
Right.
So I can't, like, I'm confused about the commercial of 250 and the isolation.
Well, when you read these purposes are designed for components associated with a mixed-use district. It may be one in this particular case, and maybe it covers it here and there, but maybe you make special attention to the pond itself because it is the unique feature of the area. It's like you said, ingress and egress, they have to be addressed. The way it is right now, it could never survive with one means of ingress and egress. And I have no idea how you ever get a secondary means of ingress and egress unless the county of Monroe buys into some kind of access point through the
See,
park.
and that's where my knowledge, I just don't know if the town can go and declare the far end a park area that would then be go up against the Monroe County
Right.
Park, and then because the town does that, then they can get an ingress because it's parkland. I don't know what's feasible. I don't know what's practical.
I think the town could, I mean, if it saw fit to, the town could actually identify in the plan that if you're a developer coming in, there's going to be a component to that that's going to be a park area. Now, where the town takes dedication of it as a parkland, we could do that. We could say, we're not going to take dedication to it, but you've got to provide these components to the general public at this portion of the property to allow the four of us to go down and just enjoy the area. Now, if somebody wants to set up a business down there to kayak, that might be one of the retail businesses that you're talking about. They might set up a kayaking business that you can go into the pond and do that. I don't want to prevent somebody from not having a business because the town, if the town wants to have kayaking down there, we shouldn't be preventing somebody from opening up a kayaking shop down there and providing that service. I don't think we should be hiring staff to be out and putting kayaks in the water when somebody else could be doing it for a profit.
Right. Jim, I just don't get it. I mean, allow a mixture of complementary land uses to create economic and social vitality, encourage the linking of trips. Should we drill it down to percentage of use? We want to see 50% residential ownership, 20% rental residents. I don't even have the vocabulary to speak these things. But how far do you drill it down?
Conceptually, and we didn't talk too much about Manitou, but when we were talking about Route 250, we were talking about percentages. We were talking about the possibility of somewhere like 75% or 70 to 75% as being residential, multiple types of residential settings, and then having the remaining 25 or 30% being devoted to some type of service uses that would provide services to those areas living there.
Well, that's kind of covered.
Is it?
It talks about density issues a little bit.
Yeah, and then it does percentage of
But I agree with you. I mean, there has to be some feeling. You don't want to turn it into just a commercial free-for-all down there because, first of all, it's not going to work. I think the kinds of commercial uses are going to probably be geared more to what's happening. If somebody wants to open up a little kayak shop, and I probably know 5 people right now that would probably want to do it if they could.
Sure.
But again, that's a seasonal operation. You might have the same company say, all right, we're going to do kayaking in the summer, we're going to have ice skating in the winter, and we'll open up our shop to for hot chocolate and all that kind of stuff. You might have that. You might have a little ice cream shop. I mean, it's like if you go to, the end of the pier there at Arundequoit, where the outlet is going out from the bay into the lake. Now, there's really nothing there except that stupid little pier. But every night of the week you go down there, there's somebody buying an ice cream cone with their kid and walking out on that pier. You get to the end, you look at it for a second, you turn around, you come back. But they're down there every single night of the week doing that, and you wonder what draws you to that, but people do it. So, I mean, if you had a nice promenade around that pond, I could see people wanting to go down there and walk that promenade, and somebody buying an ice cream
Go to
cone.
Webster on, is it North Ponds Park? North
Yeah,
Ponds Park.
yeah.
There's people there all the time.
I know.
They got an
There's
ice
not-
trail around the
yeah.
ponds.
Yep.
But they did away with the swimming.
Yeah, it was a liability for them, and they got rid of it.
Big one.
And I don't see this site being used for swimming.
I don't either.
I mean, first of all, the water quality is very good. It's better than probably Arundequoit Bay right now. But the problem is there are overflows from the creek into that pond, and when that happens, water quality drops. So I'm not so certain I'd want to encourage anybody to actually swim in that pond.
Geese haven't moved in yet either.
No, that's right. But certainly other uses such as kayaking and canoeing and
I agree. I mean, I
I think
think
that
that
those would
we're
be-
all in agreement that one beautiful use for the property is
Right.
trails.
Right.
Is, it'd be nice to have a developed promenade around.
You're right.
Right.
And when you made the comment, you had asked about whether the town would buy that property. We actually did look at buying the property. The problem is now, it's very, very difficult to get funding to spend like millions of dollars for land. At one time, they wanted $7 million, and we were talking, I think they're down to like $3 million or $2 million, something like that now. But to be able to go out and get $2 million anymore, the public they're not gonna swallow that anymore. It's just too hard.
Jim, I guess my problem with the Manitou Lake area, and, okay, these are well-written, but if it's an exclusive area, I think you're dealing with the residents who aren't going to be using the amenities that the public will want.
Probably not on a daily basis. You're right. I mean, a lot of those people will probably go to Florida for the winter, and you won't see them again. But there has to be some balance because, the public has to have the ability to utilize that pond. They have to be able to do what we did the other night and walk that pond. And to take that away from the general public, I think is a
The
sin.
general public is already,
Well, they're trespassing. I mean, if Dolomite wanted to run barbed wire around that area, they could do it. I mean,
They used to keep them out when they were.
well, when they were there, it wasn't an issue because they had security there 24/7. Now, over the last year or so, it's become a cut-through area where people want to use it and fish or whatever. I'm not offended by that. I mean, Dolomite, it's a liability issue for them.
Sure.
But I'm not offended by the fact that it's there. Nobody's bothering anybody by doing it. But it probably has to be regulated to a point where nobody gets hurt, nobody does anything stupid.
Right.
But I see those kinds of uses being complementary to the land. I don't see it as becoming a big retail area. I don't want it to be a retail area. I want it to be, I wouldn't even mind personally if it was all residential, different types of residential users.
That's pretty much the way this is written, except for the one area, which is right where those garages are.
Yeah. But I personally, I don't, you're right, it's too remote to be a commercial district. Nobody's gonna go in there.
Well, builders not gonna build it.
No, I mean, they won't build right now off of Route 250 behind McDonald's because you can't see it from the street, There's no way they're gonna build in, a mile off the road to,
but you had the appendix,
You know what?
Illinois. That, something
oh yeah,
like
absolutely. That's kind of what I envisioned for it.
That's not 80 feet high.
No,
it's not a destination.
and personally, I don't think you're ever going to get 80 feet high because there's not enough land to devote to parking. I mean, you don't want to give that land up for parking space when you could be putting something else there that's.
What happened to the other big rise that was going to go up in the neighborhood 10
Yeah,
years
they
ago?
couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it.
Economically,
Okay,
it
well,
doesn't work.
That brings up another issue. What about incentives? My understanding was, I guess it's down the hill from where you are. That was where the 8-story building was supposed to
Right.
go.
Right.
And At that time, wasn't the required, not the requirement, the height limit just 2 stories? Suddenly we have an 8-story building.
Well, that wasn't incentive zoning, that was the use of town law 281, which is still nebulous in my mind as to how you use it, but what they did was they said, we're allowed to have this much density, whether it's a 2-story or whatever. We want to take all that density, say we're entitled to have 500 units. Instead of going out, they wanted to go up and then preserve the green space around it. But like he says, it didn't fly economically. So now these guys come back saying, we don't want to go up, but we still want our density. So now instead of going up, we're going back down again, but we're going out.
Yeah, now they're getting sued by the other people.
Well, yeah, but that's okay. I mean, that's the process, and that's how America works, and that's fine. But the issue really is now, what is it you really want down there that's going to be compatible with that pond area? And it's not going to be, you don't want a free-for-all down there with people just going crazy down there. I think that if it was a multi-story or multi-development type situation where you had different types of residential uses down there, I think it would be great, because then you've got a residential group down there that are watching the properties. Then you can start doing some things that are compatible with that area, maybe bring those a little bit away. Even if you brought them up close to the pond, you still have that promenade around the pond for the public. You know, and people say, well, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. When we were on Empire Boulevard, we require everybody that builds to have access to the water's edge. I haven't had a developer yet say, no, I won't do that. They've all said, I said to them, if you want to buy the property and you're going to do that, these are the components you have to look at in order to develop it. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you're not the guy to buy this property. And so far it's worked out. I mean, we've had every single developer say, yep, we'll do it. I had one guy that was going to go completely around his property, and his walkway was not any further from me to you from his door. So they'll do it if you tell them up front. It's when you force it on them later on that you have a problem.
Much of this says a minimum of 20% of license. Can we increase that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in this case it's probably more appropriate that you do, because you want access around that entire pond, and you probably want access to the pond itself. I mean, I'm not so certain I want people jumping off of a dock into the water, but I'd like to see a dock out there that you could go out, and if you wanted to go fishing, maybe on the other side over by the gun club, if you wanted to come out. You know, remember where we were with
The sluice.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. If they did something out there that was remote of the developed area, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
The problem with that is that fishermen will find their spot. The dock will be there, but if the fish aren't there, they're not going to be there.
Well, the other part of that too, though, is that that's a design feature. I mean, if you want to put little outlooks or overlooks into the edge of the pond, I mean, I don't think that's a big deal. I think that we're going to have to identify where the most appropriate locations for those kinds of things are. But I think there should be public access to that pond, and I think we should be able to allow people to fish.
I agree. I mean, I think it's extending the trails. The public uses the trails. Use the creek to kayak on or whatever, use the pond to kayak on. I think that's an easy, no-brainer thing.
Yeah.
It then becomes complicated when you start adding in uses and demographics.
Right. And you have to, you start looking at how much parking is needed for that site on a 35-acre parcel. A lot of parking is going to be needed. You're going to have visitor parking, you're going to have housing parking, you're going to have, whatever's going on.
You can have parking along Old Penfield Road.
You can have it in a lot of locations. I certainly want to have it remote if I could from the actual pond itself, because you want to be able to walk to the pond, have an area that's still kind of pristine around that pond, and not just pave the whole thing over right to the edge of the pond.
Yeah.
Well, the trail that was there was very nice, just to walk.
Yeah, it's perfect.
When I said parking along Old Penfield Road, that would not be legal parking, it would just be people.
Yeah, I would never want to see parking on the right of way. I mean, example be for you guys. You would not want parking going up and down your driveway coming into your project. I mean, that impedes upon your right of access through the property. There has to be on-site parking, and it has to be viable parking for the public to be able to get out and move to where they have to move to.
So, can you specify a percentage of that developable land that will be public parking?
Mm-hmm. You could do that. You could say so much of the property has to be devoted to public parking for the access to that area, or whatever parking comes in has to be, maybe tied into what other parking is going to be there,
So we're sort of fine tuning then for chapter 6, what we
Yeah.
have in chapter
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
But the problem is we don't know what the developable area is.
No, that's right.
Not until they do test bores on the property. Yeah, you might find out, wouldn't it be something if you found out that 75% of the property couldn't be developed? I mean, with heavy development on it because it couldn't meet the weight requirements for a foundation? This happened in Penfield
If you
several
go
years
deep
ago.
enough, anything will recover.
Well, that's true. That is
Or
true.
conversely, what if 75% of it is developable?
Well, that's.
Exactly. And
But you
who
know, there
owns the
can't
water?
be usable land in those, I look at A and B zone. C zone is out on the road. But you look at that map on page,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right, second page is 6.
major portion of that site, the upland area of that site is
Slopes.
what they call Zone D, which is flood zones and slopes, steep slopes. So the developable area is Zone A and B, really. That Zone C is that little section where the garage is.
That'd be good to have an
on the road.
aerial up as to what's out there right now. I wish we had done that.
Well, we have one.
Yeah, but I mean, if they put it up on the,
Oh, yeah. So, oops, this way.
Again,
yeah.
making general recommendations, but then getting specific for Manitou Lake is another issue.
I know. It's difficult because truly, for as much as there's not that much developable area where you could create a city down there. Like, theoretically, you could do that out of 250. You could create a new village out there if you really wanted to.
I can't even think of the two properties in the same county.
No, and you probably shouldn't because they're two different worlds.
Well, and again, going back to this, the appendix, I read The Village at Niagara at the Falls, or on the Falls. Someone must have taken this out of a sales brochure. You have carefully implemented, gentle curves, calming, civilized, safe, unique. And then there are other areas, or other developments that, have 72 acres of land or 400 acres of
Jot
land.
down your final notes, and then what we'd like is each one of the groups to present maybe 5 minutes of the high points of your discussion.
Total confusion.
And then we'll close.
No, we can do that though. Let's talk about that. The mixture of uses, we're concerned about percentage.
Oh, jeez, are you kidding? What does it say? I don't even know. Okay. Provide a greater level of flexibility for housing alternatives. You've got condos, you've got freestanding homes, you've got apartments, you've got townhouses. I mean, how many flavors of alternative housing?
And the market's gonna dictate what they put.
True.
Well,
It
the
has to.
market is upscale down
Right,
there. That's
You might, the market might be, you know what, we want townhouses. We want, nice, that's right now what seniors are looking at are townhouses.
I'll tell you,
They
if
want
you
these-
had the Wilmots come in and build $500,000 condos down there and develop that property, they'd sell it out.
You're right.
And it would be successful.
You're right. You're right.
But it's gonna take a developer like that to do it, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, and that's probably what's gonna have to happen, is not anybody off the street's gonna be able to buy the property, let alone develop it. I mean, the cost of the property is astronomical. It's gonna be a situation where somebody from out of state might have to come in and actually develop it. God only knows if that'll happen.
Property's big enough.
But the problem is you got the gun club.
Right.
That's right. That's it. That's a real problem.
It is a problem.
Yeah.
Which is somewhat of a joke if you look at the skyline and how many cell towers.
And it's most active weekends.
So,
And after work,
Yeah.
at 5 o'clock, it lights up down there, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had my office for 40 years in Panorama Trail West there, across from the Racket Club. They tore the building down. That was my building. But I hear it every day.
You know, I feel so inadequate in this whole project. I just don't.
Well, no, I think the fact that first of all, the fact that you're admitting that is a step forward. No, really, because why would you sit here and say, yeah, I like that, and I like that, when you really don't know if you like it or not? I mean, that's the worst thing that could ever happen, you know? That's just driving a process that's doomed to fail at some point in time. If everybody goes, yeah, and nobody knows what the heck's going on. So, for the purpose, though, I think your comment was you wanted to see it more tailored to
Public.
that area.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But when you get over into section 6, though, it becomes more specific as far as Manitou.
Yeah.
Well, it
Let's look
does.
at 6 for a second.
You know, I had a few concerns.
You have to document
On the next page, where they got specifics there.
You know how it says,
looking at it from
to
this
tailor
perspective,
made, it says,
about what is,
is to provide a mix of
what are
diverse
the values
residential and non-residential. It doesn't say commercial uses.
No, but
It's kind of
it-
interesting.
maybe that is a good idea, maybe there's a follow-up to this, that's, you know, we've prompted the question now, we have a little bit of a framework to work from, and maybe there's a subsequent follow-up.
what do you consider a non-residential use of office? Home offices are not in vogue today.
Offices are dead.
Yeah, they can be up on a video screen to
Their offices that computer sitting down
they
there
are,
at the table.
That's right.
work through it, you know, that's an area where we can reconvene in a couple of weeks and put your ideas down and come back as a group and jump right into just this discussion here.
So you finally have nice weather, and now we can't come out.
No, you're not allowed to come back.
You are more than welcome
Can they put this
Well, we have 12 minutes, which means each of you has 4 minutes to
I mean, that would be helpful
wrap
for
up.
me.
So
I don't know if anybody else likes
why
it.
don't we start with the group that was at the end of the table here, Kaz, you and yours.
Me and mine.
Yeah.
Me and my gang here. We're a little conflicted. I think that we're concerned that, you know, with the types of uses that are going to be appropriate down there, I think the group is more concerned that if you have a commercial user, unless it's a really specific user that's geared to a destination point versus just another user coming in for commercial purposes, it's probably going to fail. We talked about things like utilizing the pond area for different types of sports activities like kayaking, that kind of thing. We talked about the town, probably the town allowing commercial users to do something like that versus the town doing it. And we're not going to hire people, I don't think, to go out and rent kayaks out when you've got markets out there that can do that probably more efficiently than we can. The key would be to allow for accessibility to the pond while not creating conflicts for those who are developing potentially probably high residential development down there, or more residential than commercial development, but still allowing the public in there without competing or conflicting with those users.
Can I make a real quick comment? Where I live, where I live is the festival place. So when you move in there, you know that's why a lot of people move there.
Right, and that's what we were saying. You really have to be geared to that kind of living and understand that there are going to be people coming there that don't live there that are going to want to walk the park promenade, or they're going to want to fish, or they're going to want to go out onto a dock. We did talk about the idea of maybe developing some type of public access where you don't have to pay for anything, but you got access to the water's edge, maybe a dock or something like that, over by the area that was built out for their hall. Yeah, bring that in somewhere like that so that you're not creating conflicts with people, but by the same token, still having access around that area. We talked about the issues associated with providing public parking on the site versus private parking. The idea of parking eating up a lot of the land down there versus the residential aspect of it. I think the group felt that more more residential, maybe the 70-75% range of residential might be more appropriate than, 50%, 50%, that type of thing. And I think really the feeling was that maybe some of the purposes need to be embellished a little bit to more reflect some of the uniqueness of Manitou and what Manitou, particularly in Article 6, talk about more of the issues associated with what you're trying to accomplish in that zoning district versus any other one. Just make it more unique as you're looking at the purposes.
It's cool, the idea of that activity zone, the fact that the shoreline is already an activity zone now, and it's no trespassing, right?
Right.
But it's already an activity zone.
That's right.
Well, think about how many times a public activity zone like that actually creates a synergy for what use is adjacent to it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this conflict of exclusivity and this pastoral. It actually can, almost as a boardwalk energizes whatever is feeding the boardwalk. It's the same kind of notion that could really be expressed in a place like this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were thinking, is that there's got to be a synergy between those who live there, those who are coming there, and they've got to all agree to the fact that they're going to be living with each other. Any other comments that came out? You want to say anything?
No, I guess I'd just like to see a formal boardwalk. Will bring more people in if it were left as we walked it last week, in a more natural state.
Make it a real legitimate pedestrian space, a prescribed pedestrian space.
Well, I don't think you need a boardwalk all the way around the pond. You need access around the pond, and you're right. As we walked it last week, it's pretty informal. I'd certainly make it a little more formal, with a walking path. But there certainly could be some areas, particularly over in the Zone A area, where you could do a promenade around that portion of it. And, you might have some shops that are associated with that area. I could see a canoe kayaking operation wanting to operate out of there. I mean, it's going to be, a limited period of time throughout the year, but certainly for that period of time, you might really do a nice business in that area because it's such a beautiful area to go to. But I think that it's just a function of compatibility. That's all.
Those are great.
Kayaking in that environment, you could legitimately do that activity May through October, no problem.
Right.
The water's so warm in the fall, it's not good. It's more early spring that's the problem.
Yeah.
But, and when you think about the calendar year, it's more than, we often think about those types of activity as summer only, but the season's actually longer than you'd realize.
Well, we talked about the idea, you might have a situation where, I don't know if that pond freezes over every year or not, but if it freezes over, you could have ice skating out there, all sorts of winter sports that might complement the area.
It does. When we were down there in January or February, it was indistinguishable where land stopped.
True.
And the snow that was sitting on the ice resided, so it was impossible to tell.
Yeah, I think those kinds of uses that are going to be complementary to what you have down there are the ones that are going to be more appropriate. I can't imagine anybody, we were talking about, if somebody wanted to put an LL Bean down there or something like that where it's a point of destination, you're still not going to get the people down there to buy into supporting that on a day-to-day basis to make anybody want to do it. But I think if you can get users down there that are complementary to the water itself, those are the kinds of uses you're looking for as a mix of use for commercial.
Great. Let's hear from the people who sat in the corner. Mark.
Talk to the group. We talked, definitely need to walk all the way around, but then we got into debate talking about how much of the lake access usage do we want to set a percentage to that. I mean, if we're requiring a developer to develop this, obviously they're going to want to have uses down there that, maybe we say up to 50% of the lake water is usable by the public at any given time, but obviously if they're trying to run operations or doing wakeboarding or tow ropes or other types of things that they would need and want access to the lake, that maybe it's not 100% access for the public all the time, or there's half the lake is available. So we just threw out a generic number, but I think a discussion should happen is public access to the physical water 100% of the time realistic?
Can I throw out a real quick idea, because where I live, we're going through that right now. We have two separate associations, a homeowners association and then the commercial one. And it's one of the few places that I've been to that does not have a master association that controls all of it. In that case, Mark, if you had a master association, we could set basic parameters in the ordinance, but you could also clarify that there's a master association that handles the programming of the lake, and that's where those specific discussions occur, rather than kind of leaving that to chance.
But I mean, I think we've said public access needs to be provided, but I mean, they could say, okay, you got 100 feet of shoreline over there, splash away. I think having some general parameters of how much is public access, how much is public usage, not to program it out, but at least to say 50% of the lake or a quarter of it or some number needs to be
I think it's
physical water space is accessible and usable by the public.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think we hadn't talked about the use of the lake as much in this dialogue, but I think it's such an important asset that there's value in its use, but there's also value in its preservation for public access, non-programmed, open access.
I think that's, we were broaching that conversation.
And I think that's something we can take and kind of create again, the next iteration will think about how best to express that, and then we can all see, have we achieved what it was that we thought was important? Yeah.
We also talked about the steep slopes. I know I believe in the document we talked about no use of the steep slopes. In our group, I think incidental use of the steep slopes. I don't think we're for clear cutting of it, but if you were to put up some incidental structure on it, or, again, I think we fell towards a sports theme. If you had zip lining or something, a tower on one end and something on the other end, you may be on the steep slope, but you're not, hugely impacting or not clear cutting the slope, but potentially incidental use of the steep slope area, I don't think we thought was horrible.
So steep slopes in terms of recreation, but maybe not heavy structure.
Yeah, we weren't talking about putting buildings on the steep slopes and impacting it, but having incidental structures or incidental, usage of it. We also talked about the units per acre. If we're talking, our group seemed comfortable with the 6 stories, 75 feet. Once we're talking that height, is the units per acre of 6 to 8 units per acre, is that reasonable? You got one 7-story tower with, 100 units in it. Now you're eating up a large, vast majority of the units per acre of what's left. By the time you had parking and everything else, you may only end up with one tower down there and not much else. So we were wondering whether 6 to 8 units per acre, more or less dense, we didn't get into that, but is that a reasonable number to go with, if we're talking about a 6-story building?
I'm curious where you would go with the number. A more dense number, a less dense number?
I think our group was comfortable with potentially more.
I think the issue was we were happy with not exceeding 6 stories. And the issue is if you build a 6-story building, how much physical area do you really need to support that with parking, et cetera, and making it economical and making it work? And so is 6 or 8 enough, or is it 15 or 24 because you got that one building? And of course, we're not saying you want 10 6-story buildings, and it, you've got 1,000 units or some, thing like that. So I think that we were unsure as to what the number really was, but if you were to build something that was 6 stories, what would the units really equate to that would be work?
That's a good question. Why don't you let us take a look at that, because as we said earlier, that directly ties into the ULI parking requirements for mixed use. I'm curious how much, what that winds up being spatially.
Density, 6 to 8 units an acre is not particularly in our world, certainly in a mixed use, what would be conventional mixed use is extremely low density. Now, when you project that over the areas of the site that are being conserved and preserved as steep slopes, it may net out to be that. We've talked before about whether, gosh, do we even need to have maximums? Are there other governing criteria other than that, because of the uniqueness of this site, that we should consider, rather than some arbitrary dwelling unit per square foot metric? And some of that's going to depend, frankly, upon other uses that are on the site and the mix of residential and potentially other commercial or recreational uses. So, and maybe that's one of the things that comes out of this, is maybe we don't get hung up on the dwelling units per acre in Manitou, but we get up, Dan, as you've described, into other performance measures that yield the outcome that we're looking for, rather than some arbitrary DU per acre.
That's kind of what I was thinking. If you can handle the traffic and visually it's addressed, do you care if it's 20 units or do you care if it's 6 units? If someone has deep pockets and they want to put parking underground or into the steep slope somehow and utilize the topography to their advantage, who cares, as long as nobody can see it, hear it, smell it, and the traffic works?
Well, and you're right. I mean, one solution for that site would be to do a parking garage. If you're putting a parking garage, you're talking about big bucks. So the transportation improvements that you're talking about would logically have to be part of that. And then you need enough square footage to make that economically work. Well, if it meets all of the things that you're talking about, as far as access to the water, the promenade, the trails, the public access, the visibility, it may not make any difference. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Again, Route 250 is different. We feel like there are certain there's certain numbers that you have to have in order to control it, in part because there are too many other options there, or too many variables. And Manitou, you may say it doesn't matter as long as you're below this height, and as long as you do this, and as long as you provide these buffers, and as long as you address all these issues, make it work.
The one issue I don't think has ever really been brought up, I don't think about Manitou as much as like the 250, is the sewer. And I don't know if there's a sewer capacity issue at all down around Manitou versus there is a 250, 286.
The interceptor's in Panorama, so, have we specifically looked at that? No, but because of the proximity of the interceptor sewer, it's doable. I mean, the upgrades can be made. We have, dedicated infrastructure down there that to do those upgrades wouldn't be challenging.
And again, it goes back to what you're saying, and you're right. In our ordinance right now, if you look at our multiple residential districts, it's 11 units per acre right now. And obviously, the point that you were making a minute ago is well taken. If you're asking a developer to put in a promenade and tons of paths and all the other good things that you want, he's going to have to offset it with density.
Yeah,
Without
that's a big
that density,
extraction
he's
for
not
a
going to be able to build
developer.
it.
That's a big investment.
That's the whole point of mixed use. We will give you something if you give us what we want. It's a balance.
But the perfect tension is when that investment the developer makes, whether it's in a boardwalk or something else, creates amplified value for what they want to develop. And that's what Manitou to me is so special, because they can almost help create a destination which creates perpetual value for whatever their development program is, which is pretty exceptional.
Mark, do you all have any other comments?
I think at the end we just started getting a discussion about rental versus ownership, but we just started approaching that.
And I would say we oftentimes with an ordinance stay away from that. That's.
We're starting to touch on that, but didn't get too far.
Well, we can't prescribe that through state law,
right.
so it's an interesting discussion. I think that's interesting that staff chose to represent each of the groups. Similar themes, public access around the lake, whether that's taking ownership of the lake in its entirety, or a 30-foot swath be dedicated to the town. And then that opened up discussion as to what realistically does that look like if the town were to take a dedication of the waterfront. and that's a conversation with our town attorney on, I'm thinking liabilities, is it a dawn to dusk, is it, prohibited use, or is it, like, the city of Canandaigua and Krishon Park, I don't know, but I think that as we sit around having these conversations, well, yeah, it'd be great to have public access, so let's legitimize that, but I think when you're requiring access, whether it be swimming, fishing off of a fixed structure, or boating activities, whatever, if I'm a private sector developer taking that on, I'm definitely concerned about liabilities.
Absolutely.
And then on the town's perspective, I think that we should have a conversation, staff and our town attorney, to see, if we have an idea of what that might look like.
Yeah, I think that's a very real issue.
It is.
You're kidding yourself if you're like, oh, we'll just open it up for public swimming and everybody will have a great time. Liability is a huge.
Security, we're gonna have to patrol it, and these are all things that we talked with Ainsworth before he retired about obtaining an easement around the lake, what we would have to worry about.
Well, I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I would say the majority of the projects that we get involved with, in that situation, the developer will basically want to, donate that land to the town in order to not have the liability or to not have maintenance on it. And that's pretty common.
Yeah.
We'll build this part and we'll give it to you, but it's not ours.
But a lot of times the developers will have a use agreement or a maintenance agreement
Yeah,
for
there's
these park and recreation assets because they care about maintaining the condition and value of them.
And that's where it's
for their
like,
use.
we want to be, as a developer, we want to be in control of it.
So before we put together a final recommendation, it sounds from this meeting that that's such a high priority for this location. I think we need to do some of that legwork real soon before, that recommendation is made to the town board, just so that this committee's intent in making that recommendation is X, and that's realistically possible.
Well, that's the discussion you absolutely do not want to have for the first time when a developer comes in and puts something on your desk.
Right.
Well, there's something different though too about, and it's an important point, is there's a difference between providing the public access to the lake edge and promoting the public's engagement into the lake. And a boardwalk is, in a trail that connects Ellison Park and connects, the context is one thing, but actually, I don't think in the guidelines we would ever require somebody to go get access to jump in the lake. I think we would create a public edge, but then what happens in that edge is probably another level of discussion. I think access to the edge is low risk, but starting to get into these, promoting swimming and promoting some of these other uses, there is a liability concern.
Yeah, and access to the edge, is that via easement or is that via dedication? And I think those mean two different things.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to decide that. I don't think that's.
I think your liability goes through the ceiling too. As soon as you enter the water, or you're on the water, I don't think you would ever see ice skating up there. In Fairport, we thought about doing ice skating on the canal. No way.
Even a drain canal.
Even a drain canal, we build an ice skating rink in.
That's inches deep.
Right.
As opposed to.
There's no insurance company in the world who could write a policy on it.
Yeah, realities of the world, but these are important things to discuss so that the intent of this group is still met, on the other side when all this becomes a adoption reality. But real quick, we talked about view shed sensitivity, specifically from the gun club. If people are higher looking at activities on the gun club, the noise generated on the gun club may be, it's just, what's the right word I'm looking for, more of an impact, whereas if they can't see the activities going on at the gun club and vice versa, so I don't know, something to keep in mind.
So you're saying that the zone for the 6-story building could potentially be moved further away?
possibly, just discussion items, it came up.
And I think if the use isn't congruent with the gun club, I think that a developer would naturally position that in a way where that issue would be mitigated, or orientation would be shifted.
Orientation, sure, yeah.
Just quickly for this group, you know, we've talked about it a lot, because I know the staff, every time, when we write an ordinance, we're not fuzzy on the ordinance. The ordinance is, you do this or you don't. I mean, it's not a, we hope you would, or it'd be nice if you would, or, that's not what an ordinance does. So we can't write warm, fuzzy kind of things within an ordinance. We can think of, and anyway, just a thought. So our ordinance needs to be pretty black and white. When there's a gray area in an area that's left up to interpretation, then it's that kind of puts staff and the town board in a tough position of having to do that interpretation.
And there was something else I'm trying to, in just looking here, and actually I think I've made this comment, that if the different zones were in chart format, at least even for just the review purposes, it would be easier to do apples to apples comparison as opposed to our very quick conversation today.
And we promise to have that the next version. Promise,
Got that,
promise.
As we're wrapping up, I mean, it seems like we've just gotten into discussions with this group and delving into the details and everything else. Obviously, we have the worksheets and we can continue to work on those and fill those out and feed those back. Is there a need or desire by this group to meet again in 2 weeks and continue those discussions as a group and just provide feedback to them? Would you rather do it on your own and feed your stuff back to us and we'll pass it on to the consultants?
You're always better off having people go and communicate back and forth and throw ideas back and forth, because you derive more from, a little bit from each one.
And I know it's summertime and people's schedules and everything else, but
You schedule a time and whoever makes it, you get over.
Look at 2 weeks out from today, give you time to continue to go through the document and then gather again here.
It would help the consultants if there was more input being generated to them. And certainly
in a cohesive input. I mean, we can work in small groups, but then give them, I mean, we'll have 20 people, you could get 20 different opinions all going back, and they're trying to derive a document with 20 different opinions. I think as a group, we need to come up with some cohesive decisions, some consistencies, and hash it out, discuss it, but then give them some.
You know, we didn't have a lot of time to do what we did here today because we did have some good discussion. But I think that we just devoted an hour or 2 hours to sitting down and just identify and go through the purpose of making sure everybody's comfortable and wanting to add something to the purpose and going on to the ordinance and just, you know, going through piece by piece and see if there's something in there that you really want to alter or play with. It'd probably be better if everybody was together doing that, and then it gives you more input. And you're not being rushed through the process to get to where you're going to be.
Today is August 20th.
What about 1 week? Because we're starting to get to the end of August. Target, make final recommendations to the town board.
It always takes longer.
I know it does,
But
and I told them that.
I would offer this from a town board perspective. I think this committee should take as long as they need to get a document that they're comfortable with. At least from a town board perspective, I don't care what the date is, if it's September or if it's December or if it's February. I don't think we should set parameters on due dates. We should continue discussing until we're comfortable and keep moving to the next level, whatever that next level is. And I wish there were more members of the Manitou Lake Committee here, and hopefully at the next meeting there will be more members participating, because I think the group discussion is what this committee needs to be doing. Both committees need to be doing.
And you need to advertise it as such to get more people here. We're having a true group discussion for input.
So I understand that the staff's perspective of trying to meet deadlines, and I appreciate that, trust me, but if the committees feel they need more time to put their thoughts together, then let's give the committees more time to do
It
that.
will be a better document.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt. So
Yeah.
it's a question of 1 week or 2. And we'll do it 5 times if we need to.
Well, but Katie brings up a good point. I think that we're getting to a point where we need to start meeting a little bit more frequently so it stays fresh in our mind and we
I
can
would,
keep.
yeah, I wouldn't want to drag it out 2 weeks because it's gonna lose, we're gonna lose it. If you could go another next, the 13th, which is next Tuesday, if everybody's good for that, yeah.
No, we can, like Dave, when he makes the basic, or
I always make sure we don't hit some date event that nobody's here.
Right.
Katie, Cuz and I spend enough time together.
Too much.
We need to talk to the rest of you, not each other.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we can send that out if we want to, we'll target next Tuesday, 4:30, same time. If the group can make it, then we'll continue the discussions we started tonight. I think we were just delving into it and just getting into some good discussion, and we can do individual groups and as a group. Obviously, consultants won't be here, but staff, we can facilitate that.
I see 3 laptops, 3 groups, staff taking notes. We hit send at the end of the night.
Yep.
And,
For
and
us,
then we go.
this discussion is invaluable. This is great.
All right. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Court committee members, we do have sandwiches and a salad.